Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we're welcoming you to episode 5 in our happiness series. All about happiness and is that worth pursuing? Should we be pursuing it? What is it? We've explored so much, but I want to remind everyone that we're doing this in support of our upcoming summit called What is Truth? Refining your discernment in the age of misinformation. And this is going to be amazing. We have great speakers coming up for you. Joe's keynoting, I'm keynoting, Wade Franson's keynoting. We have sessions with a lot of really great people, and we're going to explore truth in all angles, whatever that means. So join us and your fellow truth seekers July 17th and 18th. For tickets, more information, head over to summit, SUMMIT, .suitmedia.com. Link is in the description, and join us because it's going to be an exciting weekend where we talk about what is truth, how we find it, how we discover it, how we refine it within ourselves. It's going to be great. And for today, we're going to be exploring happiness. We're going to be exploring happiness in literature, which is one of my specialties, and we're going to talk about, I think, chiefly one of the biggest dichotomies in literature when we talk about depression, clinical depression, this type of thing, and that's between Tigger and Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh. So stay tuned. We're going to get into that. But welcome back, Joe, for episode 5 of our happiness series.
Thank you for having me again, Cam.
Yes, yes. So I want to dive right into the to the meat of the question, and we'll start with this immediately. Um, how do stories teach us what happiness is supposed to look like? And especially like in children's literature with Tigger and Eeyore, I think stories are always giving us a visual idea of what it looks like or what it must feel like. How do you think stories influence that?
Stories are a reflection of what we encounter in day-to-day and real everyday life. Some people say that like the novel itself is like the last great introspection or reflective introspection within art because it really, it so puts you uh, in the actual mindset frame shoes of a character or host of characters and really guides the reader along in a way unlike any other art form can do. So stories have a similar capacity. Um, and whether we're talking about children's stories or something a bit more sophisticated like a novel or whatnot, or a movie or other more modern forms. Stories are just such beautiful, great ways to sort of step outside of ourselves and yet see ourselves um, within either the character or the trope or the story arc or the situation or whatever. It was one of the and usually things that are popular are able to do this with the most efficacy. I think of like Seinfeld. I
Mm,
think why that show was so ragingly popular was because it really was a show about nothing other than common situations that people do find themselves in. And of course, they got all harebrained and whatnot by the end of the episode usually, but
right.
so often, they were able to turn everyday situations into something that was super comical, and shed some light on that, and everybody could have a laugh about it. Whereas, again, the most effective stories are really able to show us all who we are and give us something that is so relatable, and that we can see ourselves in all that. Um, so far as happiness goes, again, happiness is uh, that it's at some levels it's an emotion, but as we've also talked about and defined early on in this series, it's true and real, actual, lasting happiness. Authentic happiness is really more a state of being. It's not a reaction. It's not something that you know we get from something external per se, at least not the real authentic one that is lasting. As a reaction, happiness is great. or I should say, as an emotion. Happiness is great as something that's a reaction to something in the external. But
Hmm.
that lasting state uh, is something that goes far beyond that. And again, stories can help us see all of those things, of course, and they just reflect our own humanness back to us. So,
Yeah, there was that one children's movie of a couple years ago. My phone is dying and I need to plug it in, and the plug is stuck on some fringe. I hate technology. There was that movie a couple years ago. Um and I never do this on the show, but I'm gonna take a break and look up the title because Lewis Black was in it and he voiced anger, and it was all about
oh, the
emotions.
different
Inside
emotion
Out.
inside
Yeah,
out. Yeah.
Inside Out. Yeah. And especially like in neurodivergent communities, because oftentimes a lot of us who are neurodivergent have a lot of big emotions, don't know how to refine or talk about them, and it doesn't always resonate the same way with us. I notice a lot of people, even people more towards my age, we're talking about how helpful that movie was because it sort of had every emotion was a character, and it was kind of really clearly defined in how they interact. And a lot of people felt like, oh my goodness, someone finally kind of gets how my brain works, with the complexities and interactions and different triggers and things that happen and all this sort of thing. And yeah, I think, I mean, obviously as someone who has a master's of fine arts in creative writing, I believe everything begins and ends with story. So I think the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other, the stories that are given to us define everything. And I think that's why so many of these things are so cultural. How emotion is expressed, processed, even experienced, whether you have a word for it, is defined so much by culture. And ultimately, that's through story. That's why we have, children's fairy tales, little stories to children, stories meant to scare children, make them behave, all this type of thing. I think it all begins and ends in story. Um, and I think stories and literature definitely should give us emotional range and diversity. And I think in that way we feel a lot less alone because we have this other character, this other person who seems to be maybe feeling the same way, feeling things the same way we're feeling them, having, these same, thoughts, whatever those may be. Um, if anything, I think one of the sad things that's trended in literature over the last decade is we don't see a lot of happiness and joy anymore. Everything is dark and brooding. There's a crisis, there's a trauma, whatever have you, and we're always trying to rediscover it. Been the big thing, trying to rediscover happiness or stability or joy or the life that we thought we lost or whatever have you. Um,
But
yeah,
isn't that always the story? Like you have to have conflict in order to, right, have a resolve. Um,
Yeah, I think my chief complaint with a lot of stuff, and I tend to read the blurbs of a lot of books, and still read fiction, all this sort of thing, is the story always begins after the trauma's happened. The story tends to be the recovery from the trauma, not the trauma itself. So you pick up a mystery and it's like, oh yes, the detective who is recently divorced and fresh out of rehab is back on the case. And I've always kind of been like, back up 300 pages. I want to find that's the part that's interesting, sort of like, oh no, you skipped the interesting part, sort of thing, So I find it's a lot of that. It's a lot of the rebuild, the recovery, the getting back to a good happier life sort of thing. Seems to be a trend in literature a lot these days. Whereas older pieces like Brothers Karamazov, the reason it's so long is because it is the complete story. You know, it's the starting in a state of happiness, things getting worse and then much worse and then even worse because it's Russian, and then slowly getting back out of that. But there's costs along the way. Same thing with Anna Karenina. She's bored of her husband. She's trying to, she finds joy in the arms of another man, but ultimately loses her honor and kills herself in front of a train. Um, Perhaps Russian literature is not a good example here. Everybody dies, all tragedy over in Russia. But yeah, there's all these. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that everybody's necessarily always going towards happiness, but they're usually going towards some outcome, honoring a relative, trying to live up to parental expectations, trying to make money, trying to become rich, trying to get treasure, trying to get someone to fall in love with them. All those human things that human wants come up in story. And usually you find out along the way that things are not quite as you anticipated they would be. Sometimes the dream is a false one. Sometimes the lover dies before they can get there, or they're not that into you. You're into them and have worked really hard, but they couldn't care less. Um, Other times, the thing that you thought you were going after was not the thing that you really were going after, or it's not there, or you end up failing and it was really the journey that was so valuable along the way, and all this type of thing. There's endless variations of these sorts of story tropes and everything. Or sometimes things aren't as they seemed. Or, and this is one of my favorite ones, you don't get your goal because it would have been worse for you if you had. And that's a very hollow feeling because like you failed, but it's like, no, if you had done that, it would have been far worse for you. And, kind of here's why sort of thing. That's why you see this a lot in children's films where like Aladdin, for example, Jafar gets his wish, he becomes an all-powerful genie, but one of the rules of being a genie is that you're bound up until someone rubs the lamp and lets you out. So Jafar ends up in a more powerful but yet worse position,
Yeah.
sort of thing. So yeah, so the stories are filled with this. And I think all of this gives us a mental framework for how we think about our goals and happiness and joy and all this type of thing. It creates something, you know, in our heads. I think about how we think about these things.
Well, let's put it this way. There are a lot of stories out there, just as there are a lot of ideas out there.
Oh, yes.
It's all about what you pay attention to. It's all, I mean, you've read different stories than I have. You've paid attention or been brought up or told different stories than the next person has. It's all about what your exposure is. It's all about what you take from the stories that you get exposed to. And it's all about what you actively then pursue. I mean, we all have a choice as to what we're going to intake so far as our stories, that we are attracted to are concerned. But that's just like ideas. That's just like focusing on emotions or states of being. Is we have a barrage of different choices. It's what it is that we want to really look at, really focus in on, really, what is it that we are attracted to? What is it that kind of shines brightly for us to kind of focus our attention on? Um, so, stories, just like thoughts and emotions, and ideas, are something of a choice that we have. And yes, everybody's born, into a culture, into a family that has their own story, into a way of life that, or even on a time that has an understanding of the world, right? And that's a story in and of itself. I mean, we kind of have to tell uh, ourselves these sorts of stories in a way in order to understand like who we are, where we came from, and where we're going. And so they're extremely important in at least developing that framework. But again, it's ultimately up to you as to what you're going to extract from those things, from from the morals, from the lessons, identifying with the characters, and maybe maybe that identification almost isn't as much of a choice in some ways, although I think you could probably make an argument that everything is something of a choice because again, it's all about how we pay attention. It's all about how we choose to focus. and choose to perseverate on, this, that, or the other thing. And just because we might be more attracted to something doesn't mean that we're, a victim of it. I might be more attracted to, stories. I mean, gosh, I don't know. I'm a person who likes certain, things in my daily life. I mean, I'm a big outdoors person. Name things. I'm from, Italian Irish heritage. I've got a home, in California. So, these things that, um, are relatable to me. Maybe the stories that kind of are akin to my particular lifestyle, um, are more attractive to me. Then again, maybe, I've set up my life because of those stories, or because those stories were attractive to me before. And, I mean, it didn't always live in California. There was a time, I suppose, at some point where I certainly could have made a choice to, um, be more of an outdoorsy or an indoorsy person, right? And again, you just sort of gravitate towards your likes. And again, maybe I got it in my head, because I saw a movie somewhere, and there was some romantic idea of, conquering the frontier or whatever. And that was again attractive to me in some way, and so I wanted to try and fulfill that myself. But then kind of looking at it in the other way, um, you know, you encounter a story, you encounter, again, but it all really comes back to an ideas. It's not really even the story itself, but you encounter a story or something that happens to a character, that's outside of your experience, and then you look to pursue that experience, because you've had some encounter with it through and from a story. But again, as I just mentioned, we're not really, it's always what we extract, in terms of concepts and ideas, from the stories, and those can be really informative and helping to construct that framework for us.
Yeah, it's um I was think I agree. I think all of those are influences. I was going to see what if there was a any single piece of literature that you feel like had the greatest influence over you.
Oh, over me, I would say Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury, is
Oh,
probably
excellent choice.
my favorite, book of all time, I would say. But Ray Bradbury he's got this sort of, magical realism about him. He's sort of known as a science fiction writer, I guess. But he also does have this very hopeful outlook on things. Um, and even though, tragedies, do befall, some of his characters, there's usually a way out. There's usually something that does happen positively because of it, frequently in a lot of his stories. But yeah, I mean, if something that had the biggest influence on me would probably that book, I suppose. There are of course a number of others, but and I like mysteries too. I really enjoy mysteries, for whatever reason. But yeah, I think, and again, in relation to what we're talking about, with happiness and all that, yeah, I think I do find something joyful and hopeful and like almost sort of, innocent about, the way he puts together so many of his stories, but that book especially. So.
No, no, no. That's very good. No, that's an excellent choice. I was a big Beats person, so I always preferred On the Road by Jack Kerouac. With Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas as an honorable mention. And I think nothing I think nothing illustrates the dichotomy between us better than our choices in books. Um,
Well, I love Dharma
because
Bums. I mean, Dharma Bums was one of my favorite
Yeah.
favorites
No,
growing
the
up for sure. So
my dear friend Brady, who was texting me right as we were going into this recording, and I had to be like, I have a recording, I'll talk to you later. Her and I bonded over Jack Kerouac and Dharma Bums. My old clothing boutique was 5 blocks from the baseball diamond where Jack Kerouac played baseball in Denver.
hmm.
Um, so I drove by that every single day, and we had a copy of it up in the boutique with a little placard and everything about it. Because her and I both loved it so much, and it was Dharma Bums is how we kind of finally bonded and all this type of thing because we actually didn't like each other that much at first. And so then once we found our mutual love of Jack Kerouac, it's been off to the Camptown races for 15 years. Um, but yes, one of the things that I had in my notes on happiness and literature, we were gonna kind of focus particularly on Tigger and Eeyore, with Tigger as the personification of joy and Eeyore as the personification of kind of clinical depression and sadness. And there's a lot of us out here who identify as Eeyore and find a great deal of comfort in him and the way he tries and the way things just kind of always go wrong and his, general mood that in the 19th century would have called melancholy. Um, and how people keep trying to include him and do things for him and all this type of thing and how, even when things don't kind of work out, the gang always tries to be a little corner of joy in a world that for him is, maybe a bit sad, sort of thing. He, of all the characters, he lives in the saddest house, just it's a pile of sticks sort of thing. Um, and and he's kind of always on the struggle bus, but that never stops them from including him. Whereas, Tigger, when he arrives and becomes part of the Winnie the Pooh crew, he is lots of energy and lots of happiness and lots of joy, and he wants to be active and do things. And obviously, it doesn't take too long for Tigger and Eeyore to kind of, run into each other. Kind of like us. I'm Eeyore and you're Tigger. But so I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that contrast and those characters and how, despite it all, Eeyore does keep going, which I always think is interesting. But I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
It'd be a much more interesting story if Eeyore decided not to keep going in a children's book, wouldn't you think? Uh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, while it would be more interesting, I think the publishers would struggle with
Yeah.
putting that book out. Yeah, that would
Yeah.
be,
Eeyore
yeah,
uses his tail to hang himself. Um, it does detach after all.
it does.
Maybe that's
True.
how it's attached in the first place. But uh, so as long as we're talking about books and Winnie the Pooh,
Yeah.
House on Pooh Corner is just like such a beautiful. I mean, it's just such a beautiful book.
Yes.
Uh, and yeah, it's a children's book, I guess, but it's really not in so many ways. And actually, I mean, Disney's done a great job of this throughout the years, at least in their like modern configurations, starting with like, yeah, maybe Little Mermaids, and it was that era, kind of on Aladdin, kind of on up,
The
where
the
there's so much
90s
for.
TV show
Yeah,
version, The
right. Yeah,
Great
yeah,
Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Well, that's my childhood and it was everything and that was
yeah.
that was an amazing show and yeah, it
They
was
just do a lot for
perfectly
adult. I
grounded.
mean, again, it's yes, they're children's stories, but they're stories for all of us. And I think again, the best stories tend to have something for everyone. Not that like, I mean, The Godfather's a great story. I'm not recommending, that you watch that with your kindergartner per se, but there's something to be said about a story like House on Pooh Corner or Aladdin or whatever that yeah, mostly made for kids, but you get so much as an adult out of them also. But to that end, as long as we're talking about literature, I think the book that outlines at least the characters in Winnie the Pooh, in kind of a way that Inside Out that we just talked about, that movie sort of like typifies the just emotions, right? Or like the personification of X, Y, and Z emotion. Benjamin Hoff's The Tao of Pooh.
Hmm.
is just a fantastic read, and it's one of my all-time favorite nonfiction books also. I mean, I've always been very, very interested in Taoism, very interested in Taoism ever since really reading that book at a very early age. I think I read that book when I was probably about 13, I think 12 or 13, which maybe isn't that early, but I mean, to take on like those kind of concepts, even though Benjamin Hoff does such a beautiful job of outlining it. But he does go through this exact exercise and points out the fact that the Tiggers and the Eeyores of the world all represent something. It's very obvious what Tigger and Eeyore represent. Not as obvious that Winnie the Pooh is the ultimate Zen master. Maybe, or maybe it is super obvious,
Yeah.
but maybe not until it was pointed out by Hoff that this becomes at least apparent on a cultural scale. But yeah, I mean, we can also look at like Tigger and Eeyore and say, things don't work out for Tigger hardly much better usually than they work out for Eeyore, which kind of goes back, because of
Yeah.
his like over exuberance for things, and like overzealousness, and the enthusiasm and all that's, all that positive energy. It's like too much. And then sometimes, once in a while, Eeyore, because he's in such a funk. He also tends to just like float his way to some solutions here and there. But I can't say. I mean, the only thing who things always work out for almost perfectly for is really Winnie the Pooh and Piglet to some degree, I suppose. Because of the fact that, well, and really, I guess actually all the characters um, in the wood. I guess it all works out for all of them. Actually, I suppose at most turns, it's in some way or another. But it's usually because Winnie the Pooh comes and looks at something, and again, they all sort of stumble their way through life in their own ways,
They
um,
do.
and things come to some sort of resolve for them, though. Um, so yeah, but it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about external circumstance and your prerogative on things, having an influence on that, but ultimately your perspective is it's a choice on how to see things, and how to interact with things, and that choice is going to help you navigate through that. I mean, you've got to navigate through it. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson here is you've got to navigate through whatever it is that you're up against, but you can do it in whatever Winnie the Pooh character form that you would like to. And we don't tend to, we were saying this off camera, we don't
Mhm.
tend to utilize emotions, or thoughts that we think have no utility, that we think are not serving us in some way. So if we're going to be some certain way, we are that way because we believe that it services us in some way, shape, or form. Um, or else we would not interact with it. We would not engage with it. So maybe our choice, so far as a reflection on the story of Winnie the Pooh and the gang, um, is that regardless of what happens to us, what character form are we going to take? Are we going to be like Roo? Are we going to be like, the owl, the wise owl, well, he's not actually in Winnie the Pooh all that wise. He thinks he's
No.
super smart, but
He's a fake
um,
intellectual at
but he's
best,
a fake
yeah.
intellectual at best for sure. But how do we approach situations, right? That's a choice that we have. But and again, maybe the ultimate like moral of the story is that things do tend to work out regardless of the choice that you make. As to how you're going to approach it via what emotion or what state of being. Um, that things, as long as you keep on keeping on with them, uh, they do tend to work out. Maybe not in the way that you had wanted initially, maybe not in the way that you had hoped for, or intended for, but maybe we don't have as much control over that sometimes as we think. But what we do have control over is the personified version of the Winnie the Pooh character that we enact while we're going through all these things.
No, I think that's so the one I always enjoyed reading about was Rabbit and neuroticism and all this type of thing because I oftentimes very much identified with Rabbit as well. And I, sometimes kind of like the idea of, having my, the house and the garden and being at war with the bugs and all this type of thing, which figured a lot more prominently in the 90s TV show than it did in like the original movie or anything like that. But yeah, it was yeah, everybody kind of, and they all handle crisis in their own way. There's a movie that Disney did that was kind of a direct to VHS at the time called The Great Adventure of Winnie the Pooh, and I know this story well because I as a kid wore my VHS tape out. Like the tape fell apart at a certain point. And because that's how long ago that was, everybody. And and there's, they have to go into the different part of the 100 Acre Wood because they're trying to find Christopher Robin, who's only gone to school, but they think he's been taken because Owl reads his note very poorly because Pooh has spilled honey on it. And so they're going to this thing and they find this giant skull, and Owl has drawn him a map basically to nowhere, which Rabbit points out at one time, and all this type of thing. And one of the things that I love about that story is in contrast to some of the other media, Rabbit is the one that kind of pulls everyone together because Pooh kind of loses hope. And that's one of the few times, like, because, Rabbit wants to follow the map. It's all very exact, all this type of thing. And Winnie the Pooh's not so sure. And Winnie the Pooh just loses hope and they're lost and everything. It's kind of Rabbit that brings everybody out of it. And I think. I find for myself, you're gonna find this funny, but I feel like for a lot of people in my life, I am that emotionally stabilizing force. I am the universal constant that while everyone else is crazy, eventually everybody kind of finds their way back to me, and I'm like still here, kind of still doing my thing, and provide a certain amount of constancy that a lot of other people lack. And I was mindful of that because a dear friend of mine who died last November, years and years ago, um, when was going through a dark period, he's like, dude, you're not okay. He's like, that's not good. And I'm kind of like, you're telling me. And he said, no, you don't understand. Like, if you're not okay, then I'm not going to be okay. I need you to be fine. Otherwise, I will like lose my mind, sort of thing. And I didn't really understand it at the time, but I realized that was very true for him. Like, and some people get very disturbed when I'm a little less kind of stable than usual, and sometimes I feel like people expect that, even though I don't necessarily always feel that way. But I appreciate Rabbit's stabilizing, although sometimes misguided, force in the lives of the characters as well. So. It's yeah. Oh, and there was the Eeyore movie several years ago. They throw a birthday party for Eeyore sort of thing with predictably hilarious and crazy results. But um yeah, it's there's a little I think the reason why the Winnie the Pooh stories work so well is because there's a slice of everybody in those characters.
Yeah,
Everybody knows a Kanga, a rabbit, an owl, an Eeyore, a Tigger, a Pooh, all this sort of thing. And I don't need, nobody is perfectly right or perfectly wrong. There's upsides and downsides to every character, but sort of as a group, they can form a cohesive whole. And I think that's why we keep returning to that story and those characters over and over again.
yeah, absolutely. And again, like we said earlier, the best stories tend to be the ones that we can most relate to. Uh, but also, there's I think the stories that stay with us do give us some degree of like happiness and some degree of um, at least contentment or understanding about the world or about things and about ourselves. And as we've said before, I don't think happiness necessarily should be the goal per se. I think seeing things for as they are uh, should be the main goal. And if we're able to do that, a byproduct of that will naturally be that we're content and happy with our ourselves. It's because it's really all about you, and that's not a narcissistic statement, but if you're discontent with yourself and with your own life, how could you be content with anything else? Um, and also it's always going to be it, meaning whatever it is that you do in life, whatever thoughts that you have, whatever ways in which you engage the world, it it's always going to be some sort of cultivating factor within yourself. And I think this whole process of being a human being relies so much on understanding who we as individuals are within ourselves. And whatever means help us to achieve and do that are the ones that we're going to be most reliant on, the ones that are going to be most popularized, the ones that are going to be the most effective for us. And being so will be all of those other things, will be the things again that we gravitate towards and look to and remember and build almost ourselves like a scaffolding anyways around for us to model our own lives after. So
No, no, quite so. I think every time you've mentioned that sort of engaging with reality on its own terms, my brain always jumps to the same thought. It's kind of like I feel that and I agree with you, but I think my own, and this is personal, this isn't anything, it's just my own personal opinion. Reality is just so damn disappointing. Like there's just it's frustratingly disappointing, and especially, as someone who has the brain that I can look at a situation and quickly assess the problems, the bottlenecks, the issues, the this, that, the other thing, all this sort of thing. It's just kind of like looking outside is just a constant, engagement with this problem, this thing, that, whatever have you, all this sort of thing. And I find it interesting that, that people can maybe do that, engage with reality on its own terms, and not immediately have crushing depression from it. That to me is magic. You might as well pull a rabbit out of your hat. Because I look into the world and it's just kind of like, wow, we could do a lot with this place if we cared. Like, there's just so much to do, so much to change, so much to fix, so much to improve, ways to make things a little better, a little easier, whatever have you.
but that's
It's
what we're
it's
doing here as
it's
human beings.
hard.
That's the whole
Yeah.
point. So I mean, I understand that things aren't perfect. They never are. They never will be. But if they were, we wouldn't be human beings in the same manifest that we are, in the same incarnation of the world that we live in, or in the way the incarnate world that we experience would be. I mean, it'd be like a utopia, right? And I don't know what you learn from that. Again, we said it early on in this episode here. Stories generally have to have conflict in order to have, the climax and the resolve and all that, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
storytelling 101. It's sort of, again, what we do in this world as human beings or in this experience as humans in this life is you come up against conflict and you learn from that. And I mean, I would argue, if you're looking at things and ultimately, deciding that, it doesn't work for you and you're gonna, you look at things and you're sad about that, that's your prerogative. But I think my argument would be that you're not seeing the whole picture, that you're actually not seeing reality. Because as I mentioned ad nauseum, once you see reality, And once you understand what things are, happiness is not even really, doesn't even really factor into that. It's a byproduct of it. But I mean, the famous argument um, in the Brothers Karamazov is, I think it's Ivan. No, it's been a while since I've read that book, but I think it's Ivan who just doesn't, there's this sort of beautiful, probably the best argument um, against God that's ever been posited in the Grand Inquisitor, in the story about the Grand Inquisitor.
Yeah.
That's literally ever been posited. That even if the Messiah came back today, people wouldn't want the Messiah because all we're focused on is survival. And it's something that you and I have also talked about in previous episodes on happiness is that I think what so frequently what we think of as happiness is really more about safety. And that's exactly Dostoevsky's argument, that people don't want salvation. They want shelter and safety. That's what they want. And if Jesus himself came back to the earth and started performing miracles in front of people, and the church arrested him, the people would shackle him up and crucify him once again because it's the church that provides the actual salvation here on earth. The church that provides the safety, how they provide how this is written a century or two ago, but like
Yeah.
that does so much, does more for the community. You could substitute here the church for the state, or, I mean, probably more accurately, the state today is, the state provides, a way for you to survive in the world, um, and with some, degree of safety. Um, and then there's a rejoinder to that, by the brother who's in the priesthood or in the monastery, about how this is all part of the plan, and there's redemption at the end of this, and at the end of it, um, I think it's Ivan who just rejects that outright. And he says that even if that's the case, I don't accept it. I don't accept the suffering. I don't accept the sadness. I don't accept that those things happen in this world, in this manifest. So you can take either position. That being said, I would argue with you that if you choose to continually focus on, the bad things, and I, if you are coming to a conclusion that this is all for naught, or even if there is redemption at the end of it, and this, what we're going through here with the suffering and the difficulties and the hardships, and you reject that, even if there's redemption at the end, I again would tell you that you're not focused on the totality of the reality. Now, again, you can make another argument for that, and that's fine, but it's ultimately where you want to focus your energies and your concentration, because I think my vantage point would be, if you see that totality, if you see the reality, if you see the actuality, um, all the difficulty and suffering and hardships do ultimately lead to something. And now you could say, well, not for the people who died, or who had to go through all of this difficulty, all to come out with nothing to show for it, but more suffering and then ultimately death. Well, we don't necessarily know what happens after death, or we don't know if maybe there was, some agreed upon path that people, that this is part of, their journey, and that they had to experience that for some reason that's totally unknown to us, and that maybe it was even their choice. And I'll do you one better, and this is what I'm likely, even though I've not written it out yet, but this is as I'm putting my notes and thoughts together for part 3 of my philosophical project in a philosophical war, is that consciousness continually pivots around the individual, and that the individual has an experience of consciousness that's projected out into the world, and that experience is going to be vastly different from individual consciousness to individual consciousness, meaning that what you perceive and what I perceive maybe only interface a very, very small at very small intervals, where maybe nothing truly, maybe only what we perceive as terrible things is only a perception because of our own individual consciousness. Whereas, the person who actually experienced, or who we perceive as having experienced a terrible end or fate or suffering, did not ultimately experience that themselves, and they did not actually experience that for themselves. Is that's only our perception as an individual consciousness, that never actually necessarily happened to that individual. So that's a whole different ball game there, uh,
Yeah.
a whole different conversation. But gosh, the more I dig into the true nature of the relationship between individual and what I call the grander, larger form of consciousness, I'm not sure that there is another alternative, in that we as individuals have such extreme agency, potency, capacity, and power, that the way that we set up our own consciousness is the way that reality itself will reflect itself back to us. And that's why it's so important to hold the kinds of consciousnesses that we do, and that what we perceive might not actually be what it is that's happening. And that is phenomena only can occur given the constructs of our own capacity within our own consciousness. Again, that's a totally different diatribe than what we're sort of exploring here, but maybe not really, because again, I do think that if we understand what reality actually is, it's really hard to put a label on it as being good, bad, or indifferent, honestly, because it just is. It just is, and then happiness from there is either a byproduct of that realization, or a choice to be in that state regardless of external circumstance, or what we perceive as being something, a phenomena that occurs within the world. So,
Well, when you put it that way, that's yeah, yeah, you make it sound very, very, very easy. Um,
and maybe it
and
is, but it's not if you have a perception of it being difficult, right? So maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know, no, as someone who's never felt they've had a lot of power over much of anything, and as someone for whom things tend to happen to rather than because of, um, it's yeah, it's kind of, the whole idea of, oh, you decide and control your own reality and all this type of thing has always fallen a bit flat, because I'm kind of like, that's never been true. I've spent the bulk of my life dealing with other people's problems and issues and things that I usually didn't directly cause myself, or trying to navigate those because I got involved with somebody or whatever have you. Um, of my own self, my life would have probably been rather boring. Um, sort of thing. Um, as the old canard goes, hell is other people. And so yeah, there's just so many different circumstances along the way. But I think, and then we'll end because you gotta go. But the one for me that I think is really tough is, and I think this is probably maybe the thing I'm most disappointed about in the world. You have no guarantee. And this is an advantage Eeyore has that a lot of people don't. Eeyore gets met where he is for who he is. That has very rarely happened in my life, on only a handful of occasions. I know there's a lot of other people in a very similar way. And I was joking with someone that I felt like this series was literally kind of turning into a neurodivergent versus neurotypical conversation, and I'm desperately trying to avoid that because it's so reductionist. But I think, I think so much of this stuff and perspective and how you handle things and how you deal with emotions, all this type of thing, is one easier and better in community. We're meant to be among friends and family in a tribe of about 150 people. That's the default programming. We've taken that to an extreme with these huge civilizations, but really we're supposed to be in a tribe of 150 people. And and that and that there's so much of that that is supposed to get processed in community with other people. And I think one of the problems now is things are so isolating, and there's a lot of us that even if we're in a community, we don't get met where we are for who we are. And I think that was the thing that always disappointed me the most about the world and reality outside of myself is nobody really comes to meet me for who I am. They would like to meet of the performance version. They would love to, sometimes they would like, the educated erudite person. Sometimes they want the jokester who is a stand-up comedian and toured and all this type of thing. Sometimes they want the business person who will get stuff done and make stuff happen, all this type of thing. But very, very rarely, do they kind of want to meet the mess, the hard parts, the difficulty, the emotions, all the crazy and spinning insanity that has been 38 years of my life. And even when I was a small child and I hadn't had time to have a crazy life yet, it was always, oh, that's great, but not that way. Or, oh, you can't really do that. Or you shouldn't really do this. Or all this type of thing. And so it was just kind of like the frustration starts to grow, I think, and it piles up pretty fast. And then there keeps kind of being all of this pressure to do it the right way, express it the right way, be the right way in the world, all this type of thing. And I always joke that I tell people, I said, if someone when I was 14 years old had been willing to talk with me about the crazy ideas in my head, I would have never had the career that I had. I would have never invented a show that talks about ideas or anything like this, but I did all of that with one singular purpose, ultimately. And that was simply because I wanted to talk about ideas with other people. That's all I really ever wanted to do. Now, I invented a whole other personality that was performing and doing all this stuff to kind of cover up that because as I quickly found out, no one was interested in doing that. And that's part of the reason why this is the second to last episode of this show, because people still didn't want to do it. Um, Sort of thing. Um, and I think that is probably the thing that has always disappointed me the most. Is it's just like I showed up, I have all these ideas, I have all this stuff, I read all this stuff, all this type of thing. I have a million different ideas happening all the time, all this type of thing, and everyone is just kind of like, no, thank you, sort of thing. And so I created something else that I thought people would find acceptable. It didn't really work. I eventually gave it up because it didn't work out. But yeah, it's I think to constantly offer yourself to the world and for the world to constantly say, no, not you, not like that, please do it differently, all this type of thing. I think it gives one a color of reality. And I don't mean to just use myself as this example, although it's the one I know the best. I think there's a lot of people who have different aspects and shades of this that just find the world is really great if you can kind of tick some of the boxes. If you don't really tick any of the boxes, people don't really know what to do with you. And the thing I love about indigenous cultures is they even had a spot and a slot for the people they didn't really know what to do with. They became shamans, they became shepherds who spent their lives on a mountain as far away from the village as possible. But they had something to do. And too often times, I think in our modern society, we tend to throw those people away and they end up homeless, they end up on the street, whatever have you. And quite honestly, a lot of them end up dead. And which I suppose is one way of solving the problem. When I found out that autistic people only had an average lifespan of 55 years, I knew immediately why. It was painfully obvious to me, sort of thing. And yeah, I think it's a very difficult thing. And I think that's where my disappointment with engaging in reality comes from is in my view it seems to be a one-way road. And I think in an odd way, that's where the melancholy comes from. Quite sad. I hadn't really thought of that. I just came up with that right now. But it's yeah. So anyway, we're way over time as we usually are. So any final thoughts before we wrap up episode 5 on Tigger and Eeyore?
Well, none other than be like Pooh as much as
That's
possible.
yeah.
As
No,
much
I
as
co-sign. No, I co-sign that. Yeah, I think that's an excellent bit of advice.
possible.
And I think in a weird way, people think his constant happiness is a bit vapid. I think it's because Pooh's got a lot of things figured out, you
I think
know,
he doesn't have anything figured out, and he's just happy going along with it.
and that's why he has everything figured out. It's one of
There you
those
go.
weird, yeah, it's one of those weird, he knows nothing and therefore knows everything sort of thing.
But
Yeah.
Cameron, extrapolate that to everything that you just said. You're always trying to you're always trying to figure things out, and you're always trying to put things in categories and slots, and oh, that didn't work out, and the world didn't accept me, and just fucking go with it, man. Just go with it.
But I would also say to why and to what point.
That's up to you.
Yeah, see
But if you're
that's
gonna
the yeah.
co-sign being like Pooh and then saying,
No, I mean I think that's still I think that's still good advice. You know, Pooh lives a very, a rather I mean his life is very simple and yet very full. And I think yeah, I think that's probably where you want to be. You know, I definitely see the wisdom of that sort of thing. It's but for me personally, that kind of what's the point? That's my view. It's kind of like, yeah, his life is very simple and very, very, very full. In my view, it seems a bit empty, but I also think given the world in which we now live, that's probably the best way to survive, oddly enough. Which I is its own sad testimony of our times. That's another show. But it's yeah, I mean I no, I see the wisdom of it for sure. It's yeah. So all right, well, as the listener has figured out by now, me and Joe always, our relationship has started with conflict and it continues thusly. So, I want to remind everyone to come check out our summit, What is Truth? Refining Your Discernment in the Age of Misinformation, on July 17th and 18th. And also, Joe, we haven't really talked about this yet, but Joe's new podcast, Being Human Being, is coming out here very soon. I was just looking at the episodes last night
well,
and we're getting ready to do that. And so if you love this type of conversation, the Cameron Journal is going away in July. But Joe's podcast, Being Human Being, will be marching forward quickly into the future. So if you love these types of talks on this sort of thing and you love listening to Joe, you're going to want to check out Being Human Being as soon as it launches. So, anyway, summit.suitmedia.net. The What is Truth Summit. Make sure to come on by for that, and we'll see you next time.
see you then.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.